Hello, everyone. My name is Chris Adams. I'm the president of Balancing Act. We welcome you to session 2 of our Makers Workshop. This is a three-part series that's designed to help you think through why you might want to or need to do budget engagement, and to show you how Balancing Act and simulations in general can be a helpful tool for that. I'm joined today by my colleagues, Brendan Morrison, who is a co-founder of Balancing Act, Dan Ferguson, who is our senior software engineer, and Peter Diederich, who is our national sales director. We are looking forward to your questions. This is intended to be a workshop, and so I've actually heard from a couple of you that have some things that you'd be willing to share and talk about and discuss. So we'll be hearing from at least, I think, 3 local governments today, as well as continuing to learn how to use the Balancing Act tool. So before I begin, just as I said, it is supposed to be a workshop. So please, if you want to talk or ask a question, please feel free to raise your hand. There should be a little control panel on the far right over there where you can raise your hand, and then we'll call on you. You're also welcome to use the questions feature, which allows you to type in a question, and we will do our best to answer it online, and if not, afterwards. And you can also feel free to use chat. So having said that, I'm just going to go ahead and begin, and we'll get started. Okay, so as I mentioned, we've had a really an excellent turnout for this session. This is an example, or this is a list of the participants. Most of the local governments are on the left, and then we've got some non-governmental organizations on the right. So the plan for today. So last time we talked about how to we talked a lot about the why to do balancing or to do budget simulations, and today we're going to mostly talk about the how. We're going to drill down a little bit more deeply. Hopefully, most of you were able to create a simulation, a trial simulation account, so that you could begin trying things out on Balancing Act. And I know that some of you did, and we're actually going to check in with one of you today. But today we're going to go a little bit beyond the basics. We're going to go beyond the plus-minus interaction. We're going to talk about adding, using rich media and videos and things like that for context. We're going to look at settings and adjustments. We've got this really great new feature that allows you to customize entry modals. And then we're going to talk about meeting mode, which allows you to use the Balancing Act simulation in a face-to-face setting. But before we do that, I want to sorry, we're also going to hear from Bellevue, Washington. They entered their basic information, and they're going to kind of talk about that experience and how they made some of their choices, and also to maybe ask some questions or talk about some challenges. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and the 2 speakers that we have are Sam Smith, who is budget analyst at the City of Charlotte, North Carolina. They're one of our older clients. And then we've also got Mike Brzezowski, who is from the communications side of the house, and he's manager of communications and marketing at the City of Beaumont, Alberta. So I'm going to go ahead and unmute you, Sam, if you're on. I hope you are. There we are. So I'm going to unmute you, and I've asked Sam if you would just say a few words about kind of what Charlotte has done with budget simulations and with budget engagement, and they've got some really exciting plans for what they want to do next. So Sam, I hope you're on, and if you are, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Yep, absolutely. So happy to be here. Thanks for having me. So let me start talking, I guess, about how we kind of gravitated towards Balancing Act in the first place. So as I'm sure most of you all have, giant budget books full of lots of very useful information that most of the public doesn't really understand or care to really delve into deeper. So we were struggling to figure out how to communicate all the good information that we felt was in our budget book in a simple, graphical, easy way to understand. So that's what ultimately led us to adopt Balancing Act a couple years ago. So we decided initially that our path was just going to be to inform the public. we weren't exactly looking for a whole lot of feedback back from the public. We just wanted them to understand a little bit more about what the budget, and we focused really on the general fund piece of it instead of the entire comprehensive budget. Since that time, and mostly this year, we've sort of gone past the informational piece and are trying to get feedback back from the public as to understand a little bit better about the trends of what is important to the public. Are they increasing a lot of economic development related initiatives in the city? And so we might need to invest a little bit more in economic development services. Are they looking at things like our fire department and increasing the budget there because they want additional services wherever they live in the city? So we've partnered very recently. It's actually still kind of going underway right now with a local university, the University of North Carolina at Charlotte, and they're going to be running a series of experiments for us. So we wanted to see a few different things that we were a little bit leery of doing in our active simulation, such as changing what the adopted budget meant and showing it as a tax versus other things, as well as starting at a budget deficit. So we're going to have them take a look at how people influence and use the game when they start on a balanced budget versus when they start on a budget that has a deficit. So we're still very much in the learning what we're trying to do process, but we started informational. Now we've gravitated into getting feedback from them. We've started to use our local resources in the university system to try out some of the things that we're not ready to try out ourselves. And through this whole process, we're hoping to be able to gain a little bit more insight as to how the public wants us to start spending money.
Well, that's great, Sam. I hadn't heard that you were partnering with University of North Carolina. They have some terrific faculty there that have a lot of expertise in local government finance, and I know that they've really shown an interest in tapping the potential of cloud-based budget simulations to better connect government to residents. So that's wonderful to hear.
Absolutely. We just met with Zach over at UNCC, and he's very interested to play with a few things that we were a little too scared to play with because we didn't want the public to, specifically with the budget deficit, we were concerned that people would assume that Charlotte has a deficit and that they're trying to fix a real problem that we have. So having this kind of sandbox environment is allowing us to do a lot of unique things that we wouldn't otherwise be able to do.
Well, that's great. And I'll just also just comment on what you said about, having some fear about sort of putting things out, especially if there might be some negative news such as a deficit. One thing that we found is that the simulation, it conveys negative news or tough choices in a different way, because what it does is it asks people to think like you do, which is in a problem-solving way, and to deal with whatever curveballs are throwing. I'm sure many of you have many curveballs, expenses that far exceed what you thought there'd be, revenues that fall short. So I'm really looking forward to what you guys do in Charlotte, Sam. Thank you so much.
Yep, absolutely.
All right. And I've also, because I mentioned earlier during the first session that we've seen kind of the most successful budget engagements work when there's strong participation from the budget finance side of the house, such as where Sam is from, but also from the communications, marketing, public information officer engagement side of the house. And so I've asked Mike Berezowski from the city of Beaumont, Alberta, to also just share a little bit about what they are planning to do. They began working with us last year, and then they had some personnel turnover, but we're looking forward to really supporting them this year and to seeing what this medium-sized town in Alberta, Canada does with the tool. So, Mike, are you there?
I certainly am.
All right. Yeah.
All right.
Would you mind just saying yeah, please.
So as you mentioned, there's been some personnel turnover in the last little while. We have a new chief financial officer who just started with us. I've been here for 6 months myself. And, we're really looking at how we do things in terms of engagement with the community, how we are demonstrating value for taxpayer dollars in our One of the strategies I've got in our communication strategy is to better demonstrate value for dollar, because that is something where we've consistently in the past shown up low in our citizen satisfaction surveys. And the other challenge that we have is that we are a rapidly growing community. We're the fifth fastest growing community in Canada, and that puts tremendous growth pressures on us in terms of infrastructure, recreation, and of course, there's the fiscal pressure of that we can't run unlimited tax increases to pay for all these things, and we can't go into debt for an unlimited amount to pay for these things as well. There has to be some trade-offs. So what we're really, in addition to demonstrating that value for taxpayer dollars, we really want to get a better sense of what the community's priorities are for spending. Because, as I'm sure with most communities, we get the organizations, community groups that all have fantastic proposals. They all need funding for. But getting a better gauge of, is this the community's, top priority, or, is this a small group, and putting that in perspective. And also on the other side of things too, is getting those groups to understand that we do have limits and that there are trade-offs, so that there's a bit of a public education piece to that. That's something that we'd like to accomplish. Traditionally in the past, we've done budget open houses, and if you've ever done those or town halls, really the only feedback you get is the people who are motivated to come out because there's something that they absolutely hate or absolutely love, and that tends to be mostly the people who are there to oppose something that they feel really strongly about. But again, it is not an accurate gauge of the actual community.
That's actually really good perspective, and that's actually one of the reasons why we initially created an online budget simulation. At the time, I think I might have mentioned this at the previous session. My co-founder Brendan Morrison and I, we had small kids, and we were interested in things that were going on in our city with the budget, and we saw budget open houses that we could have gone to, but they were in the evenings, and with young children, there was just no way that we could have gone. And I have gone since, and you're right, it is kind of the lovers or the haters that come out, people with the strongest feelings, one way or the other, that come out. And when you have something that's online that somebody can use at their leisure and spend 10 or 15 minutes and actually learn quite a bit, it actually gives you a new opportunity to get a much broader swath of input from people that wouldn't ordinarily go to an evening meeting or a Saturday morning meeting, and to really just kind of understand things a bit better. But the other thing that a simulation can do, and we know this now from some research that was actually done with Balancing Act simulation, is it also moderates those polls. So I don't think it's ever going to be the case you won't have the people with the extreme strong feelings, the lovers or the haters. But what Balancing Act can do is it can sort of shift their perspective. And we know this, that after people go through the simulation, those strong opinions, one way or the other, moderate. And we think that's a valuable thing, because you all, as public administrators and leaders, don't necessarily have the leisure to say, I'm just going to do all this and forget everything else, or I'm just gonna cut this because I don't really care about it, I don't use it. And so it just makes people into more realistic problem solvers. So that's great to hear. I think it's a great use case, Mike.
Well, thank you.
Yeah, and we're looking forward to supporting you. I think we've got about 10 or 12 clients up in Canada, and it's been really nice to work with the Canadian cities and even the province of Manitoba, because there seems to be a really nice culture of engagement and public involvement there. So we're looking forward to working with you on that. All right, so next we're going to go to William Wallow, who is a senior budget analyst at the City of Bellevue. And William, I am looking on here to try to figure out which person to unmute, and I'm going to unmute David Baldwin, because I'm not sure if you're with him or not. But if send up a flare if I have not unmuted you.
You got it right. We're under David's name.
Good. All right. So I just want to say a little bit about why I'm asking William to say a few words. We looked at the folks who took out trial accounts, and we looked at Bellevue's, and it was just perfect, because it had really kind of sort of gone right up to the edge of where we were hoping people would go in terms of the work between last session and this session, and it just seemed like a nice opportunity to kind of let them sort of talk about their approach and what they found, and maybe even some challenges, and kind of set the table for us to talk a little bit more today about what will be about how to add some more advanced features. So I'm going to share theirs with permission. I'm going to share theirs on the screen. And William, why don't you go ahead and just and make your comments. And if you want me to move to a particular part of the simulation, just direct me.
Sure thing. So the rest of the
Say a
team
little
is
bit about yourself
well.
too. You've got an interesting background, William.
So I am a new senior budget analyst here at the City of Bellevue. I've been here about 4 weeks. Prior to coming to the City of Bellevue, I was actually a PhD student at the University of Washington. I worked mostly doing state and local public finance research, but wanted to get back into the weeds, into the nitty-gritty of actually working for government. So the rest of the team is here, and they're obviously a little more familiar with the city's budget process than me, so they'll probably chime in too as I'm going through this. So how we started building this simulation, we traditionally have budgeted by outcome, but for the purposes of this exercise, we thought it might be interesting to use our city council's vision priorities to organize where we're spending our dollars. So we have all of our proposals that come through in our biennial budget process linked to outcomes, and then these strategic target areas, which are the council's vision priorities. And so there are 7 areas that we have listed here, and within those they all have the various departments whose proposals hit these target areas. So you can see which departments are spending what aspects of the council's priorities. I know you sent me over a few questions earlier today. We have had some discussions about potentially using this tool in internal discussions with either the city council to kind of show them what would be the effect of adding budget here or there, or communicating this to other departments. But these numbers were essentially just pulled from our budget system. In terms of like challenges that I faced, it was a pretty easy process. It was just uploading the CSV files. It was very streamlined, very straightforward. But I guess some of the things I'm looking forward to hearing during the rest of this presentation are, we've had discussions regarding like, can we go beyond just these subcategories of the department level, and can we add more detail in terms of like proposals if we think that's something the public would be interested in, adding in things like FTE count within these subcategories so people can see not just where the dollars in our operating budget are flowing, but how many personnel are working towards that goal. Does anyone else have anything?
No, that's great. Good. Well, so you're contemplating both potential internal use as well as an external use of the public, it sounds like. Is that right?
That is right, yes.
That's great. Good. Anybody else on the Bellevue team want to make any comments about sort of, getting their feet wet on this?
No, we have no other comments.
All right. Well, good. Well, thank you so much for this opening shot here with Balancing Act. And the questions, I was jotting down the questions and things you want to learn more about. That's pretty much what the topic of today's discussion is. So you had also said, and I hope you don't mind, I was going to just, and we're going to show you kind of some of the things that we'll be working on today, and just kind of playing some things out. So I'm going to show you all this in just a few minutes, but I wanted to show you that over here on the far left, on the upper left, there's a sort of a blank place for you to put your logo. I'm going to show you where to put your logo, and you can link it to things. The other thing I was going to show you is that we've got all sorts of opportunities to provide context, as you mentioned. So I'm going to show you how to apply an info icon at the category level and at the subcategory level, as well as to frame up some options. And we call them scenario questions, but they're really multiple choice questions. But you get a nice opportunity to describe each of the different options and kind of share how difficult a decision it might be with the price effect, with the cost of each option attached. And gosh, it's looking really good. The one thing I would say, and I know that you're not done with it at all, is that we found that if you have more than about 4 of these subcategories, that the ones below that often don't get much attention. And so we've not heard any complaints from residents. We would get more complaints from budget analysts and budget directors for rolling things up, and so combining things. And so we found that to be fairly effective. And I'll give you an example of how we do this in kind of our sandbox account. We kind of roll things up that are kind of less controversial, under less scrutiny in 1 year, so that you can bring other items to the forefront. But I think it's looking terrific, and I love the idea of, as I mentioned last time, I love the idea of showing, of organizing your budget, not necessarily by department, but by what your goals are. And I know that can be challenging to do that initially, but we found that that when you do that, it actually just makes a whole lot more to residents in terms of how you're spending your money. So, well, thank you. We look forward to seeing what might be next for you on this.
Awesome. Thanks.
All right. So let's go back to the PowerPoint, and I'm going to just do a brief review in order to kind of set the table for showing how to add some of these more complex features. So we're going to talk about how to manually create and edit a category and subcategory. And before we do that, I just want to review really quickly. There's 5 basic data elements that go into Balancing Act, and I think Bellevue had added 3 of them in. I think they'd added the category, the subcategory name, and the subcategory amount. We're going to talk today about adding more info, which is what appears when you hit the blue info icon, and that's this item right here, and then also more details, which you can put anything you want in there. So I'm going to now go to my live account, and I'm going to, just for the sake of demonstration, I'm going to take about 30 seconds here, and I'm going to pull in some new categories so that we can start with a fresh simulation that only has the plus minus interactions. I'm going to say demo for session 2, and then I'm going to say create from scratch, and then I'm going to continue. And then just like I did last time, I'm going to pull in my revenue categories and import the CSV. And there's the revenue, very simple CSV. I'm just going to skip through this part. Then I'm going to pull up my spending, and I'm going to import a CSV. And now we are at a place where we've got our basic simulation, and we've got some items. We're on the spending side right now, so we've got police, and we've got the subcategories of operations, detention, civilian staff, parks and recreation. We've got parks, and we've got recreation. I'm going to spend a little bit of time on this police side a little bit, just as an illustration. I realize that our Canadian colleagues don't necessarily have too much discretion over police budgets, but it's still a good illustration. And just talk about some things that you can do. So once, just like Bellevue, once you get this much accomplished, you can make some changes. So let's say that you wanted to change detention to something that might be a little bit more intuitive. Let's just call it jails. So very easy to do. You just type in jails, and then you click check mark. And let's say that you wanted to change the amount from 225,000 to 200,000, and you just click on that, and you're all set. And let's say that we wanted to go up to operations, and we want to take that extra 100,000, or that extra $25,000, and just add it in. I think if my math is right, that should do that. And so it just to illustrate, it's really easy to do this. If you wanted to add a new category, once you've got your baseline in, you could do that in a very simple way, and you could just put in, let's call it 911. And then you can click the plus sign, and then let's say that you wanted to give that a budget of $100,000, and you're all set. So now if we were to take a quick look, we could preview that, and I think we'd have an unbalanced budget because, yes, we're $100,000 in deficit because we had $100,000 worth of spending without having an offset. But we can see that we've now got our 911, we've got our operations, we've got our jails and civilian staff, et cetera. I'm going to go back to the simulation. I'm just going to refresh this. And then I'm going to go to spending. And let's say that we wanted to move things around a little bit. We wanted to have 911 down below. So we could just move 911 down below. If we wanted to move a category, it's the same idea. We just move it and then and just place it where we want. So once you get, even though it's easy to get that baseline in by importing the CSV, it's once you get that, you can really manipulate it and do kind of whatever you want in terms of kind of arranging it and reordering and things like that. All right, I'm going to go to my sandbox account. This is one that's already been created. I'm going to demonstrate a couple of features, and I'm going to show you how to create them. So if we go over here to Police Department, this is what I was saying, and once again, it's completely up to you, but given people's attention span, we really try to encourage you to keep your subcategories to as few as needed, and realizing that the public generally doesn't care too much about things being rolled up. They kind of just want to sort of see an accounting of where things are. But I want to show you a few things. So in this case, I've rolled up a lot of police operations into kind of one big omnibus, and the idea being that maybe there's not a real, the items that are contained in here, that it's not a real decision item, or it's not under heavy scrutiny. Not that you don't want to scrutinize it, but it's not something that's really up for a whole lot of debate right now. But then you can see that there's different ways of interacting, and so I've got this is called a scenario question, and in this case, a scenario question is being used to take the temperature for a potential cost savings measure. And so there's $90,000. Unlike the plus minus type of interaction, this one has a question attached. And so the question here is, should civilians be used to take most police reports instead of sworn officers? And you can say, I want to learn a little bit more about that. So you can click on here, and you can find out that some research suggests that these non-sworn officers could do the same thing that non-sworn officers could do and save some money. And then over here, I've just very simply added this link to a study on police consolidation so that people can kind of go and look for themselves. This also works not just with the public, but there might be resistance or there might be concerns about this within the police department. So if you're using it internally for some potential cost-saving measures, some ideas that might have been developed through performance or budget or analysis, it can be a really nice way of sort of testing acceptability among staff for some of these changes as well. So let's say that somebody wants to continue, or at least wants to learn about that. And it's very simply here, this is current practice. I'm not sure what I put in for more details. I think I had a picture, but I think I moved it, so sorry about that. But then you could say, well, what happens if we use civilians? So you click on this, and you find out that there's $90,000 worth of cost savings, and you've actually got a surplus up here now. So I'm going to show you how to make this type of a question. And then obviously you can share and you can comment on it as well here. I'm not going to do that right now. And then I'm going to show you, and then here's a couple of other things I wanted to show you. So we've got detention. Let's just say that you've got somebody that wants to eliminate the detention or the jailing function of the police department, that they just don't like the idea of government locking people up, and there are some people out there like that, and they want to zero it out. So there might be a temptation to make a slider, I just want to demolish this whole function of government, but we actually don't think that's realistic. In some cases, it's not even legal. And so if you hit the plus sign or the negative sign here, it decreases that amount. And when you get to a certain point, it says reducing the expenditure below $200,000 would mean the prisoners would need to be released against state law and/or that conditions could not be met. So we call this a hard floor, and I'll show you how to create that as well. Let's see, I wanted to show you a couple of other things. Over here on the taxes side, you have the ability to adjust not just by a lump sum like we have here for property tax, but you can adjust by a rate. So and you can fix the increment. So right now this is adjusting by 0.25%, and so each click takes you down 0.25%. And as you can see, it's a fairly sensitive item, so it reduces things pretty quickly. If you sort of the opposite of what we're doing with detention, with cutting, we have the ability to add what we call a soft ceiling or a soft floor. So this is more of a warning. So somebody says, this is based on law in Colorado, that if you wanted to improve, to have a tax increase, you have to get voter approval. And so if you want, you can say, no, you can't do that. You can completely restrict that choice, or you can have sort of a soft ceiling like we have here. So you let people make the choice, but you're just letting people know that your elected officials or the senior administrators at the staff don't have the authority to make a tax rate change. A couple other things I wanted to show you, because I think William kind of touched on these, is this idea of adding context and really kind of giving people a good sense of what's going on. And so you have this option now. It's not necessary, and we don't have that many entities that do it, but I'm hoping that we see more and more as visualizations get better and better. When you click more info, it says the police department is responsible for enforcing laws. And if you click more details, it gives a little bit of information here. It says over the last 5 years, the overall police department budget has increased an average of 0.7% annually, and just a little bit of background. But then it actually connects to a live visualization. And so You can use whatever visualization software you want. This particular one is OpenBook. It's made by Questica, with whom we have an API, Questica Budget. They're a Canadian company that make really nice purpose-built budgeting software for government. But they also make this transparency product that is pretty nifty. But you can also use Tableau or Power BI or really anything you want. And even if you don't want to have like a live updating visualization, you can put in a photo here or a video or just a graph, a static graph if you want. There's all sorts of things you can do. Just another example down here, William, you had mentioned FTE. I think I've got an example of that I can show you in a little bit, where you can pop in a graph that shows FTE and so forth. All right, so let's go now to the back end, and I'm going to show you how to create these various things. So I'm going to go back to my simulation, and the first thing I want to show you is how to make those controls, those plus minus controls. And so if I go here to jails, and I want to put in well, I'll just show you what we have. So you click on the three dots over here, open up standard plus minus settings. And if you wanted to lock it, I didn't show you this, but if you want to lock the category so that you have a bond payment or interest payment, or there's just an item that can't be changed either because of law or because of policy or impracticality or so forth, you can choose to lock the category and then use the little padlock that shows up and it just says this item cannot be changed. You can set an alert. So when I attempted to raise taxes, property taxes, and it gave me an alert that says, I'm not sure you can do this. That's what you do here. It's very easy to display. You can say, you just choose when you want it to go off. And then you can put in a note here that says, a vote of people is required. And if you wanted to put a link to whatever statutory or constitutional requirement that is, you want to put a widget or so forth or a picture, you can do that. I'll show you how those work in just a moment. If you wanted to adjust the item change rate, so right now on that plus minus setting, everything goes up by default 1%, and we think that's realistic. That it isn't too often when a budget item goes up more than 3 or 4%. That'd actually be a very extreme change. So we have it set pretty low. If you wanted to change it so it goes up at 3% or 6% or whatever, you can do that. Or if you want to have it adjust by a dollar amount, you can just type in a dollar amount, and that's completely fine too. So I'm going to put in 25,000 here, and then if you wanted to put in one of those boundaries where you're saying, this item just can't go below this amount, and if it does, something calamitous will happen, you can put that in. I'll put in 190,000. And then once again, you've got the same editor down here where you can add all sorts of formatting features or pictures, etc. And if you wanted to add a ceiling as well, you can. And then you say done. So now, if I were to go to the preview, and I can look at police, and I can see that things look a little bit different. So under jails, I've got 200,000. If I try to decrease it, it lets me know that I've reached the minimum amount. If I want to increase it, I can do that, and it goes up by a different amount. It goes up by 25,000 as opposed to the 1%, and so forth. So just it gives you a lot of options to make changes to things. All right, let's take a look at how we would make this type of a question. This type of a question, the role of civilians question. So I'm going to go over here, and I'm going to go to civilian staff, and I'm going to convert this to a scenario question. And so this is just on the back end for the reports. I'm just going to put civilians. And then the question is going to go into a paraphrase. Should civilians be used where appropriate to take police reports? And let's say the first option is going to be no. And so there'd be a $0 difference from the status quo. And then under the info bubble text, we're just going to say, there is value in having officers interact with the public, something like that. And if I wanted, I could throw in a picture here. I could put in a picture of of a police car. And then it asks me to say what that is in order for us to be accessible for people who have vision problems. So I'm just going to type in police car, and we're going to submit. And then I'm going to come up with a new option down here. I'm going to add an option, and this is going to be yes. And the dollar difference there is going to be negative 90,000 because this is a cost saving measure. And I'm not going to really do too much else. So then I'm going to say done. And I'm going to do the preview again. And skip through these. I'm going to talk about these in just a moment. And then if I go down here, instead of having civilian staff have the plus minus, it's now got the question here. I could have added an info icon here if I would have wanted to. It's got no by default. And here it says there's value in having officers interact with the public. And then we've got a picture of a police officer or a police car, excuse me. And no is a status quo, so there's a $0 difference. But if we choose yes, there's a negative $90,000 difference, and now it's actually reduced the deficit that we created for ourselves down to just $10,000. So that is some examples of how you can change the type of interaction that your residents have with various items, and we really try to give you a lot of options there. All right, so the next thing I want to talk about is general settings and the profile. So if you go over here to settings, you have the ability to do all sorts of things as well. So you can choose your language. So we've got a number of different types, different languages. I'm going to just leave it on English for now. You've got the ability to create an overall adjustment. This one is used fairly rarely. Now, an example is the state of Colorado has this state education fund that it was in the Constitution in 1876, and it just kind of throws the rest of the budget off. It's sort of an anomaly, and so for that budget we put in an overall adjustment, and the amount that you add there is just added to the sum of all revenue categories, and you can put in negative numbers if you want. Redirection URL I'm going to talk about next week. This is what we use for scientifically valid research. I'm going to skip over that one for right now. You've got a number of different settings, so you can allow, you can turn the commenting feature on or off. So that little word bubble, thought bubble that you click on to allow commenting. If you don't want to receive comments, you don't have to. And by the way, I'm going to show you this next week when we look at analytics. The comments only go to you unless you choose to share them. This toggles on and off the. This toggles off the social media sharing. And this one allows the submission of an unbalanced budget. So if you were like Charlotte, it sounds like might be thinking about doing this, you have the option of submitting an unbalanced budget. And if you want to allow that, you can. Most of our users require that because they want the folks going through the simulation to have the same requirement that you have, which is that you have to balance the budget. Down here, you can display subtotal for revenue. Or subtotal for expenses. So if we look at what Bellevue did, it looks like they did avail themselves of that. So they are showing the totals. I'm going to say it's about 50-50. Some of our clients like to use this and some of them don't. And then down here, you can, this is just a back-end description if you want to say this is my test or something like that. We won't really worry about that. But then you also have the ability to add some additional context. And so, and this shows you where it goes. So if you were to type in something here, it would show up here and you can add a picture. This is a common place to put in something like, don't miss the budget open house coming up on March 18th. Or, if you have more information, please email here, something like that. And then once you've got it the way you want it, you can just save it. There's also the ability to add some information down here to the footer. This kind of looks like a footnote. So we often have people put sources like say, this information comes from, the 2020 budget book, and it is using a revenue forecast that was created on April 15th, something like that. And these are completely optional, but it just gives you a couple of different places where you can make some overall comments to people. And then this down here is, we call this ad hoc meetings. And so I'm going to show you meeting mode in just a moment. Meeting mode is the face-to-face setting that we have that you can use the simulation and adapt it for use in face-to-face settings. This gives you the option of letting people use it without you, essentially. So The main reason why we created this is that we know we have a lot of high school and college teachers that use Balancing Act as a teaching tool. Usually it's for state or federal budgets, but we make it possible for you to go ahead and create use the face-to-face meeting feature without you necessarily enabling it. That'll make more sense in a few minutes when I get to that. All right, so now I want to show you a little bit more about adding context. And so I'm going to go back to, I'll go to the spending side here. And let's say that we want to, put in a little bit, stick with our police example here. If you, the pencils here will open up a modal for you to add more info and more detail. So I'm going to go ahead and do it at the category level here. And we're just going to say, police are responsible for enforcing laws. And then down here, as I said, we've already seen how we add a picture. We just click here. But let's say that we wanted to add something a little bit more interesting. We wanted to add a link to something. So let's go up here. I'm going to go to this to Largo, Florida, and we can take a look at their we're looking at their visualization, and I'm going to see if I can find let's see, department. I'm wondering if his police. I'm going to drill down a little bit, and then let's see, I'm going to drill up one. I'm going to drill up another. Sorry, it needs to give me the option to share. And why is it doing that here? Let me just go here, budget actual data. There. Oh, where is it? Oh, it's up there. Excuse me. Okay. So I'm going to grab this embed code. I'm going to grab just the part of it that is between the quotes because it's already been set up for an iframe. And then I'm going to copy that, and I'm going to embed it into Balancing Act. I'm going to open up a code here, and I'm going to plop this in, and hopefully it'll all work. And there we are. So that same visualization we're just looking at is now here, and it's live. And if somebody wants, they can click on it and get more information and more detail. So if you're using Power BI, Tableau, OpenGov, OpenBook, any of those are really neat ways for you to get more information and get better use out of those transparency tools. Now let's say that I wanted to add a movie. Actually, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to go to the exit and entry modals and give you a chance to take a look at that as well. So when I was showing you earlier that, oops, sorry, I think I didn't save something. That when we reload this, you get these entry modals. And so I'm going to show you how to customize those. And if you want, you can even pop in a video. So we'll skip through that. And we'll go to, you can first have a chance to ask a question. So the question here is, are you a resident? If I wanted to ask another question, you could say something like, are you satisfied with value for your tax dollar? And then I'm going to just leave that as a text question. And then I'm going to say value for dollar. And then we're going to say done. And so now the question shows up here, and we can choose to include it here. We can make it required. We can choose even to ask again on exit. So like I said, we've had some really interesting experiments done where people have gone through the simulation, and after doing the simulation, their opinions tend to moderate. And we also think that they probably have a little bit, that there's some knowledge gain in terms of what they've learned. And maybe the next thing that our research team will be testing is, does trust increase? So these are the entry questions. And then we've also got exit questions. So these show up when you hit the submit button on the back end. But now I'm going to show you how to customize those entry modals. And so let's say that we wanted to add a custom logo here. So I'm going to go, I'm going to select a picture here, and I've got my Anytown logo, and I'm going to type in logo, and we're going to submit that, and now I've got this. And now I could say this budget simulation is a way for you to learn about spending and revenue and provide your input. City Council is eager to have your informed opinions, something like that. And then you can save that. Oh no, there's a typo there. And so this will now show up on that first modal. And then if I wanted, I could also show something. I could put in a message from a mayor, perhaps. So I'm going to go to this is our customer page on our website. And I'm going to pull down, this is a neat little video made by Cambridge, Minnesota. It's really kind of fun. It's got these, the mayor sitting with two residents that have dressed up like Norwegians, Lena and Oli, and they're having a conversation about why it's important for people to provide budget input. I'm going to grab this as some code, and then I'm going to go back down here, and I'm going to paste that in. And now we've got a little budget video. So then now I've got my second screen that is going to come right before those survey questions. So let me now do a preview. The adjustment must be a number. I wonder what I did wrong there. Let's see if I didn't save something correctly. That's what did I do here? I think, let's see. Let me see if this will get us where we need to go. Sorry about this. There, I think I just didn't fill that out correctly. Okay, so now we've got our logo that shows up here, so you can now have more branding options. And there's a little bit of text down here. And then there's also this video that plays right from the simulation. I don't want it to play right now, but I was just going to show you, this is kind of a neat thing where they've got, this is the mayor, I believe, and these are two characters, and they're just sort of asking about why it's important for citizens to understand budget issues. And then you can hit continue, and then you've got these questions. Please provide some additional information before starting the simulation. Are you a resident? Yes, no. And then you continue and you go to the simulation. So this is a brand new feature. And it's one that we think will really help for you to introduce your simulation and to kind of get things going in the right direction with your residents. All right, so now I think that's about everything. I'll just stop there and see if there's any questions that anybody has about anything, any of the things I've covered so far. If you do raise your hand, feel free to use the chat or the questions feature. And if not, I will keep on going, and I'm going to talk very quickly about meeting mode. So meeting mode is one of our favorite features, and I'll send this. We'll make this handout or this PowerPoint available to people. But here we are. Let's do meeting mode really quick. So meeting mode, I think I mentioned this briefly last week. It's a way for you to create a special instance of the simulation that can be used just in one face-to-face setting, and people can use it on their phones, on their mobile devices, on their tablets, etc. And then they get to see the results displayed in real time. So the way that you'd create this, I'm going to go back to my account here. The way that you create this is you go to the Meetings tab, and then you say, I want to create a meeting. And we're going to call this demo for Feb 19. And then you choose which meeting you want to do it for. So we'll just use demo 2.0, and we'll continue with that. And then it gives you some real simple options. So you can put in your location if you want. You can put in a description if you want. I'm just going to put office, and then the description will be community group, and then you save, and you've got the ability to then interact with meeting mode. So this is the one I just created, and so the way that it works is you open the public view, and it looks very similar. There's just one important distinction. It looks very similar to the one that we just created, but instead it's got this submit button down here. So I'm going to just make some quick changes here, and I'm going to say let's use civilians, and then I'm going to decrease the tension a little bit, and then I'm going to submit the category. And then I get this little green check mark up here. And then when I go over here, I can open up what we call the facilitator view. This is what you'd have projected for everyone to see. And as you can see, it's no longer balanced. And when you open up police department, you see the changes I just made. And so this is all aggregated. So if you have 2 people, it aggregates the 2 responses. If you have 400 people, it aggregates 400 responses. And this is nice because it just gives you a great opportunity to have a real conversation with people, so that you can kind of talk about, why did they say the things that they did, and maybe to provide them, with some, additional context and to see what their neighbors have to say. It's just a really nice way to get some good use out of face-to-face interaction and not just online. It's also especially good internally. If you have a staff meeting, maybe you've got a group of 20 that need to make some decisions about preparing a budget request. It can be very valuable. We've had some cities that have actually used it for all staff meetings because the city manager wanted staff in various different departments to understand the competing needs and to maybe be a little bit more productive and helpful in terms of thinking through how strident to be about making a budget request and so forth. So that's been a really powerful thing as well. So I think we're almost to the end of what we're going to cover today. And we are. So I'm going to just stop and see if there's any questions and discussion. And once again, raise your hand if you want. And I know if I'm on these things, I don't really raise my hand very much, but would love to know if you can. It looks like Jennifer Peterson has a question. She asks, in the settings, what does it mean to have a balanced budget? So balanced budget is essentially it's just meaning that your revenue and your spending match, and if you want, you can allow it basically. And I think you're getting to the imprecision of the wording of the question. It basically, if you uncheck that box, it allows somebody to submit a budget that isn't balanced. And so we have a good number of clients that start out with a deficit. And part of the exercise in doing the simulation is that they need to actually, make the hard cuts. Either make a revenue increase or make a hard cut, and that requires them to do that. We've got some entities that, especially early on in the simulation or in the budget year, when you don't really know about how hard of the cut needs to be made or how big of the cut or exactly what the revenue is going to be, where they can allow somebody to submit an unbalanced budget. With the U.S. federal budget, which is never going to be balanced, I don't think, or it hasn't been balanced for a good 18, 20 years or so, that one we let people submit an unbalanced budget. And I hope that answers your question, Jennifer. And if it doesn't, let me know and I can find something for you. And I'm just going to take a quick scan. Meg Jakubic has asked a question. In the scenarios, she asks, in the scenarios, is your only option multiple choice on one question, or could you have, for example, equipment replacement list and they choose multiple pieces of equipment? That's a really great question, Meg. We thought about doing this for a number of years, and no one had asked for it, and we sort of have it on our development timeline. And I think it's going to be something that we'll be building in the next 2 or 3 months, where we can allow multiple responses, sort of like a pick list. The reason it's a little bit complicated because we need to figure out how it interacts with our analytics, but it's definitely something that we're thinking about doing. So really good question, Meg. Thank you for that. And I'll just see if there are any other questions here before we move on. And I'm not seeing any. So let me move on to getting us all set for next week. So next week we'll be talking about analytics. We'll be talking about taxpayer receipt, which is, it's really its own app, but it's related to the simulation. Once you've got the spending side of your simulation ready, you've really got most of the work done for taxpayer receipt. We'll talk about dedicated funds, which is a way to only allow certain spending items if a user is willing to identify some dedicated funds, some new revenue sources that could pay for it, such as a sales tax to help with road paving, that type of thing. You can also use it to show that certain funds may only, even existing funds may only be used for certain things, such as a fund that's been created to acquire open space can only be used for open space. It can't be used to help offset operations in the police department, for example. I'll be talking about our impacts feature, which I think I showed this to you last week. It's one that we're really excited about. It allows you to show secondary and tertiary impacts of a budget decision. So one of the most obvious ways of thinking about this is to show short-term and long-term impacts. So the impact of a budget choice of a service level on the current budget in terms of how balanced is the current budget balanced or not, and then also what that impact might be on the future. So GFOA is really doing a lot of work right now on fiscal sustainability. So looking at things like including pensions and real costing things, pensions, paid time off, things like that, infrastructure, sort of building those into current budget decisions. And so we've got a really nice tool that we're using for that, and we'll show that to you next time. Interestingly, we've had some interest in also using it to show impacts of budget decisions on climate change. And so we did something with the state of Arizona on that, so that was kind of neat. I'll give you a little preview on research mode. So most local governments don't need this, but we actually do have a way. We've got a special version of Balancing Act that can be used for scientifically valid research, and we've got a methodology for putting a representative sample through. So this is probably mostly interesting to larger governments, but it's something that we can do and something we're sort of excited about. Multiple languages is actually pretty easy, but I'll just show you how to do that. I kind of hinted at it earlier today. And then really importantly is talking about communicating your simulation. And just letting people know about it, and what are some strategies that we've seen work, and we'll show you some videos and some attempts at kind of let people know this is available and to invite them to interact. And then we'll also, I believe, we're going to have City of Morgan Hill, which is just about to launch probably in about 3 or 4 weeks, I think. Morgan Hill, California is going to sort of share there. So theirs is in development as well. And I'm not sure if they're on today, but they're going to, I think they're going to be on next week, and they're going to kind of talk about what they've been learning and working on. Getting ready for next. If you haven't created a trial account and you want to join in on the fun, I hope you see it as being at least slightly fun. You can get a trial account. I'll show you the address in just a moment. Or actually, it's really easy. You just go to our homepage and you go to the bottom right corner, and there'll be a place where you can sign up. Give it a try, and if you have any questions or want any assistance with it whatsoever, just let us know, and we're glad to set up a 15-minute meeting just to kind of do a one-on-one to make sure you've got everything you need to have fun with Balancing Act. Let's see here. Oh, there's the trial account. So this is the address, abalancingact.com/signup, and it's just a really easy. It's no cost, and it'll allow you to kind of build your simulation and kind of get a little bit deeper in this. So I think that's it for today. I don't see any new hands up or any new questions. Feel free to be in contact with us, and maybe we can even take a peek back at Bellevue next week and see if they've used any of the new features we've talked today and integrated it into their simulation. So once again, thank you, folks. We really appreciate your interest, and look forward to talking to you next week. Take care. Bye.